So let's start. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining the webinar. I think more people will be connecting in a couple of minutes. I am Guillem Arís. I am Director at Autoocupació, an NGO based in Catalonia, supporting underserved entrepreneurs since 1986. I am representing here EMAP, the Network for Migrant Entrepreneurs to Scale Up and Grow, funded by the European Union under the COSME program. You can find more information about our activities in our website. I will share the website, the link in the chat in a few minutes. If you are interested in receiving more information about the EMAP activities, I would like to invite you all to share your contact details in the chat or to contact us through our website. As part of our activities, promoting migrant entrepreneurship, we are delivering 3 webinars to support practitioners to better design and deliver their programs for migrant entrepreneurs. We had a couple of weeks ago a first webinar led by Chris Massey on how to train migrant entrepreneurs. Last week we had a second webinar led by Klaas Molenaar on access to finance for migrant entrepreneurs. You can find both webinars in the website. And today we will focus on mentoring, and we are very lucky to have Professor Bob Garvey leading the webinar. As a mentor, I think Bob will go through the content asking you powerful questions like what does mentoring mean, or what are the difference between mentoring migrant entrepreneurs and local entrepreneurs, in order to have an open discussion. So I would like you to invite you actively to actively participate, answering Bob questions, asking him whatever you want, and sharing your opinions and experiences. If you want to participate, please go to the participants list. You will find the option to raise your hand, and you will be unmuted, and Bob or me will invite you to participate and say whatever you want. I want to announce that the webinar will be recorded and will be accessible in the EMAP website in a few days, like the other ones. And now it's time to briefly introduce you to Bob Garvey. Bob is one of the world's leading academic practitioners of coaching and mentoring, and of course an experienced and a great coach and mentor. I met Bob first time in Barcelona in May 2017 when he came to support us to improve the Youth in Spain mentoring program. And we met again in Albuquerque in the annual conference hosted by the Mentoring Institute of the University of New Mexico in 2018. And with both experience, I really love the way Bob leads whatever he does. You always feel like you are joining a mentoring session, and listening Bob, you really experience why mentoring is so powerful. So Bob, please, the floor is yours.
Hello. Well, good morning, good lunchtime, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. Have I covered everything? I hope so. Very good to be here, and thank you very much, Guillem, for the introduction. That's good. What I'd like to start off with is saying that I hope that this webinar will happen in what I call the mentoring way, which is I'm making an assumption that every single person that's in this webinar is a complete expert in their own life and work, which means that sometimes we need to, because we're experts, sometimes we need help to think things through, to come to our own conclusions, and sometimes we need a little bit of content or experience to help us think through to come to our own conclusions. So that's what I hope to do in this webinar, is to ask you questions and also provide some content as well, some of which comes from my experiences and some of which comes from research as well. So putting those things together with your expertise and your experiences, hopefully we'll come to some kind of decisions or conclusions during the webinar. So I'm going to start with my 2 favorite questions. the first question is, first two questions are, should I say, is so what? You've given up some time and effort and energy to attend this webinar today. And my question is, what does that mean to you? So what? What does it mean to you? And I have no idea what the answer is. Only you know the answer to that question. So I'm asking you to think about the things that are discussed, either things that I raise or questions that get raised or things that other people say, and think, so what? What does that mean to me in my context, wherever it happens to be in the world? And following on from that, there is a question that once you've thought about what it means to you is to say, well, what next? What am I going to do about that? What actions might I take which could make a difference to me and the people that I work with? So if you can hold on to those two questions and keep them in your mind all the time, because you have the answers to those. I don't, only you do. So let's move on. Next question. What is mentoring? What is mentoring? What do you think? What is it?
You can raise your hands and you'll be unmuted.
Is nobody going to say anything? See, the good thing about being an experienced mentor is I can do silence. So the question is, what is mentoring? What is mentoring?
Sure.
Hi, Jörg.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Guillaume.
Hi.
The mentoring is a form of conversation between two people where one person is available for the other, the mentee, and through this conversation they try to find solutions or discuss topics which are relevant for the mentee.
Okay, fantastic. Does anybody want to say any more or say something less or say anything?
Well, I mean, we have the mentoring dream team here, so I guess we will have more
mentoring dream team.
Boris,
So,
Joe, John, Anna.
Okay, so come on, who else? Who else? Somebody's just typed in here, listening, asking powerful questions, being supportive. Yep, okay. Yep, fantastic. So what's important is that you have a sense about, first of all, what mentoring actually is. And certainly it's those things that you've mentioned. It's what Anna's just said here as well. Let's just have a look at what I've written down for you. Here we go. So I've got here a description, not a definition, it's a description of what mentoring is. It's a learning relationship between two people. And that's really important to emphasize because actually both people learn. So the mentor learns and the mentee learns. And it's important, thinking about who your mentors are, that they are open to learning themselves. The relationship requires trust, commitment, and emotional engagement. If those things aren't present, it's not a proper relationship. It's a transaction between two people. It also involves listening, questioning, challenge, and support. So one of the things that makes the difference between mentoring and any other kind of human relationship is the challenge business. We don't always challenge each other. And mentoring has to have a bit of challenge, but it has to happen within this relationship of trust, commitment, emotional engagement, and support. And then challenge can work very well. So a mentor may push their mentee quite hard to think about things that are important. And mentoring has a time scale. It's important to recognize that. And fundamentally, nearly all research on mentoring points to mentoring providing psychosocial support. And what that means is that it deals with people's psychology, the way in which they think and the way in which they feel about things, the way in which they understand, the way in which they learn things. And it also is about the society in which they find themselves, the cultural environment in which they find themselves, whether it be a national culture or whether it be a localized one, whether it be the culture of the business network they're in. Mentoring can provide that psychosocial support within that environment. Somebody's just put in here, making a real connection leading to a desired outcome that works for both parties. Yeah, absolutely. So that's what mentoring is. And we can think of mentoring in different ways. I'm just going to use this slide here, which is how hands-on is the mentoring or how hands-off is the mentoring. So hands-off is a number 7, helping them think through ideas for themselves. And hands-on is a do it for them. I wonder how far you think mentoring fits within this 1 to 7 framework. What would you say? What would you say? Which is the most helpful? For whom? In what context? 1 to 7. Any thoughts? You can unmute, raise your hand, type something in. We've got 3 people looking at the boxes, so we won't miss you.
Can I, Bob?
Yeah.
It's Boris.
Hi, Boris.
Hello to everybody. I just discussed previous week this with our mentors.
Yep.
And all of them think that the best options for mentors is 7 and plus 6.
Yep.
To help and to add if it's needed and
Yes.
if it's missing something on ideas of mentee.
Yep.
This is the best way for mentors.
Yep.
And of course, sometimes for mentees, it's easier when mentor, instead of them, will bring ideas, but it's not helpful because they will not create their own thinking.
Yep. I think, Boris, what's really important is what you just said there at the end. It's help the mentee to create and develop their own thinking about something. And that's really, really important. And yeah, options 6 and 7 offer the best scope for that. Where might the others be appropriate? In what, because the question is, who's it helpful for whom and in what context?
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts? Is Anna wanting to speak? No? Okay.
Com es fa per aixecar la mà?
You should go to participants list. Your mic is open. You can talk.
Ah, ara. Okay. Yeah, sure.
You're
Hi.
open.
Briefly, Catalan input.
Ron,
Sorry.
you have the stage.
I was trying to unmute, but okay, it's fine.
We have the control, Anna. We have the control.
All right. Thanks. Well, probably it could work if the mentee if the mentee needs more support. For example, I'm thinking in number 4. Show them how to do it. For example, no?
Yeah.
We have seen different entrepreneurs who don't have a specific knowledge of something, and they need kind of briefly teaching, no, in some areas.
Yes.
And well, the mentor, it's not a teacher, but sometimes it could give information, or it could give specific tips or some resources where they can find information.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it could be useful for them then to through the mentor show, no, how to rise or how to get the knowledge.
Yeah, sure. I think that's absolutely right. There are times, I mean, some of my experience of working in some countries with young entrepreneurs who are just kind of starting out, and for example, you know, some of them, you know, have a roll of cash in their pocket, and if you ask them, you know, what's your profit margin, what's your break even, they look at you and go, what are you talking about? I've got cash in my pocket. And actually that's of course that's an issue if you've got cash in your pocket, but sometimes they may need to be helped to show how to keep appropriate records, some bookkeeping perhaps, to support them in the process, so that they do start to get a handle on that information as to whether they're making any money or not. You know, having a pocket full of cash is not necessarily an indicator that you're doing well, except that you've got cash in your pocket. So yeah, there are times when some of these other aspects might be appropriate, but as Boris says, really ultimately what the mentor needs to be aiming for is to enable their mentees to move to 6 or 7. Okay, let's move on. One more.
One question.
Yep.
Because I think that probably the one of the most challenging ones, it's number 5, advice, giving advice.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes, no, when a mentor is trying to give an advice, it's more or less close to number 3, no, tell them what to do, no.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you're quite right, Anna, and that is a very difficult aspect actually, because basic principle, nobody ever took any advice unless they wanted to. And so the key technique here is for the mentor to be able to share their experience, which is what advice is about, in a way which is like presenting information and data, giving the mentee an opportunity to discuss it rather than saying, I'll tell you what you want to do, or here's the answer to your problem, or why don't you go on? Or the worst one of all is, have you thought of? Because you think the mentor may think that's asking a question, but actually it's giving an instruction. So it's something not to be discounted, because sometimes the mentor does need to have some input and draw on their own experience, but it's the way that they do it that is important. Gaining the other person's permission, creating the ground rules which can enable experience to be shared in a way which is supportive and encouraging, rather than telling them what to do. There's a lot of mileage in this slide in working with mentors, actually. There's a lot to be discussed, as we've just seen, a lot of thought here, and it helps provoke mentors into thinking about their own practices and how they work and what's appropriate. So being mindful of time, we better move on. So the other thing, and this comes directly from very good research, that people who are involved in mentoring need to be very well aware of, and that is that mentoring relationships go in phases. And this research identified that there were 3 phases in mentoring relationships. One was progressive, where the relationship was established, ground rules were established, they created the commitment, the trust, the listening, the support, and it progressed right the way through to positive outcomes along the way. Other sorts of mentoring relationships end up flatlining. They go flat. So the mentee may think, okay, all my stuff is resolved, don't need the mentor anymore, and it flattens out. Nothing much more happens. And some relationships break down, and this is inevitable. What this research showed is that the key to making mentoring relationships successful, that is progressive, is actually the development of the mentor. And what the mentor needs is ongoing development and support. They need to be very well aware that ground rules are essential and they need to be reviewed regularly. And mentors need regular opportunities to talk and discuss their work with each other in order to try to avoid the flatlining problem or the breakdown problem. And what this research shows is that those mentors who do get ongoing development, ongoing support, who are able to talk about the challenges that they meet, develop much more progressive relationships that progress to sensible and good outcomes for people. So that's one of the central points. And this is where YBI and Co and organizations around the world can really make a positive impact for helping people to become entrepreneurs. So let's move on one more, because we have to remember that this webinar is mainly focused on working with people who come from different sorts of community. I don't like the word migrant, and I'll explain why that is a bit later. But if mentoring is those things that we've just talked about, if it's that, should working with a different group of people with different needs be any different to that? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? Anybody want to say anything?
Well, what I have seen is that sometimes people or entrepreneurs are a bit conditioned because of the experience that they had before arriving to our organization and before starting the mentoring process. So their history it's makes an impact, and this impact changes the way that they see the world, feel the relation with other people, etc.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about the entrepreneurs or the mentees here, Anna, are we?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if we think about it from the mentor's point of view, if a mentor is all those things that we've just talked about, should it make any difference that the person who is coming from a different background, has different experiences, different knowledge or whatever, should it make any difference to the way in which they are mentored? Jörg?
To be perfectly honest, I don't think so. The basis of mentoring relationship is, as you said earlier, is trust, is rapport, and it's this relationship between two human beings. And to be perfectly honest, I don't see a difference between a mentor and a person from a different community. So, but as Anna just said, I think we need to prepare mentors, or to make sure mentors are able to navigate in different cultural settings. And also they need to be aware, depending on where the people are coming from, depending on their history, that there might be things popping up they will find very difficult to deal with. So any kind of trauma, I think that is something which should be left for the professionals. So in my opinion, there should be a connection to a mentoring program manager, to a coordinator who is able to support or bring in specialists if needed.
Absolutely. So what is central here is that you've got a mentor that we hope will be demonstrating commitment, trust, ability to listen, holds back on the advice giving, listens genuinely to the person that they are mentoring. But it also is important to be aware, as a mentor would be in any context, but particularly in the context that we're talking about, is that there may be a need for referral elsewhere, because there may be issues which the mentor is unable to deal with because of the experiences that their mentee has been through. Now, a mentor can still offer support and still offer help and encouragement and challenge, but it may also be necessary to think about referral perhaps to other sorts of agencies to help with other issues which may have come as a result of these people's experiences. So vital that a mentor is aware that this is a possibility, and they need to have their own kind of set of antennae, if you like, which says this is getting out of my comfort zone. So what is key are the ground rules. absolutely key in this context that the ground rules are discussed at length and reviewed, and issues like psychological safety are discussed as well. So the next slide that I've got here is about cultural issues. And I think that it's very tempting to talk a lot about cultural issues as if culture is a kind of thing. Actually, what culture is a bit like a bar of soap in the shower. It's difficult to get hold of, and it's very slippery because there are big C's, i.e. national culture. So, you know, big debate goes on in many countries about what does it mean to be Spanish, for example, in a country where there are lots of other subcultures within it. What does it mean to be British, where there are lots of subcultures within it? So there's big culture, but there's also culture which is located really smallly within the confines of somebody's family and friends, or within the network in which they inhabit where they work, and who they work with. So culture is a very difficult subject, and it's very tempting to kind of say, oh, you have to be aware of the cultural issues, but not everybody experiences the cultural issues in the same way. I'll give you an example. I have been working in the Middle East over the last year, and sometimes before I went, I read a book called Coaching in Islam, and I got into the second chapter and I found it really, really unhelpful. When I got to the country, I raised this question with the people that I was working with, and one of them said, I wish people wouldn't write books like that, making us different. Why do they do that? And in discussing things with my daughter, she said, hey, Dad, why don't you write a book on mentoring in Catholicism, or mentoring in the Church of England, or mentoring in Hinduism? Because it's the same kind of thing. My experience has been that you cannot necessarily make decisions about how far people's culture influences them until you're in a one-to-one relationship with them. Because people will have different relationships with their culture depending on their different experiences. And this is why mentoring can potentially be so powerful, because it can get into that personal understanding of those difficult cultural issues and how that person experiences them and relates to them. Any thoughts on that before we move on?
You can raise your hands.
Okay. Let's move on. There's another potential issue here, which is in working with with groups of people, is the potential power difference between the mentor and the mentee. And that's something which both mentor and mentee need to be aware of and talk about it, because there is a possibility that the mentee may see the mentor as more powerful. Now, this isn't just in the context that we're talking about in this webinar. It could be in general with mentoring relationships. And if that is the case, it's very likely that the mentee will play what I call the do something for me game. And this is a genuine risk, that the mentee will think, I have this powerful mentor from this particular environment who's very experienced, very knowledgeable, perhaps older than me, and therefore wiser than me, perhaps. And I will expect them to do something for me. And the problem is if the mentor does start doing something for them, it creates a power imbalance in the relationship. It becomes the person who does for them hands out advice, does it for them, makes the introductions, etc., etc., and not the mentee who stands on their own 2 feet. So what's needed here is the mentors particularly need to be aware that this could be an issue and need to learn not to be doing something for them all the time. And they need to be alert and aware that that's the potential. Has anybody got any thoughts on that?
George?
Indeed, that is in mentoring. That's the easy way out for the mentor, right? So
Absolutely, the easy
ask
way
me
out,
something
yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
and I happily jump over that tiny little stick you put in front of me, and I can guide you and I can tell you what to do.
Yes.
But again, it's not really what mentoring is about, but it might make it easier for the mentor, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, it's very tempting, and I've been there myself so many times. First of all, to do something for somebody who says, "Oh, it's okay, but I don't really get that," or "I'm not sure what to do," or "Please help me," or whatever. It's very tempting to go, "Okay, I'll help you." Particularly if you've got a well-motivated and committed mentor. But actually, non-help, that is helping them to think it through for themselves, is likely to be much more helpful. Unless, of course, we get into the scenario that we talked about with Anna just earlier, where the person genuinely doesn't know. And then it's the mentor's skill and ability to ask questions to check whether they genuinely don't know or whether they half know or whatever. And then things can be a little different. Any other comments on that? Any thoughts on that?
I've just unmuted my mic. Bob, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, I actually had it today, about an hour ago, on my mobile phone. So I'm based in Lancashire, working with Syrian refugees.
Okay.
And he wanted me to go and find a van for him. He's a carpenter who's setting up his business. And
Yes.
so we talked, and then I sent him a link to Auto Trader and a few other of the websites, explained how the process works.
Yep.
Let him go and have a look at various vans and things. So what you say is absolutely true. You can help and assist, but it's a very fine line when you go over that line and you end up doing it all for them. So you do have to hold back and keep giving them advice and suggestions, and as in this particular case, web links to go off and have a look for themselves.
Yeah, and maybe help to, as you say, find out how to use that particular web link. But, you know, and set them challenges, perhaps, as another way forward, which is, you know, okay, you're looking for this piece of equipment. Where do you think you might look, first of all? What help might you need in order to go and search for this piece of equipment? How will you know when you found the right piece of equipment? That kind of question is going to enable them to think the thing through themselves. And as you rightly say, it's very tempting to say, "Oh, right, I'll tell you what you want to do." It's more helpful to let them work it out for themselves, because then they will develop their confidence, develop their experience, develop their knowledge as well.
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts on that? Thanks for that. Okay, I think the next slide I've probably covered already, but let's just put it on the table. This question of othering, the question of othering. So we can refer to somebody as a migrant, and I wonder what kind of connotations that has in people's minds. Any thoughts on that?
Maybe putting them all in the same category.
Yes.
All migrants, no? If they were the same, no, independently of their city of procedure or country of procedure.
Yeah. Sure. It kind of puts a broad, it's like a big paintbrush full of whitewash going like that. That's everybody. It's not treating them who they are. Somebody's put it depends on a migrant from where. Oh, any thoughts on that? Can you say a bit more on that? That's on the chat.
Okay, hello, do you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, thank you. What I was saying is it depends on where someone is from. So if
Okay.
someone is from a neighboring country, let's say like France and Spain, they know each other. There's that formal, people of different countries know each other. But it's someone from far away, a distant place where there's almost no relations between the two people. They see those people very different.
Yep. Okay. So what does that mean then? What does that suggest?
Well, as you're saying, the other people have preconceived notions of people from a certain place.
Yeah.
While people who are nearby, they know them and they know they're basically almost the same.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get you. So there is something very peculiar about human beings' ability to focus on difference rather than similarity. And I think any kind of development work that you do with mentors needs to be thinking about what brings us together, what is common, and what is similar. Absolutely. Bringing people together and embracing what is the same, which is we are human beings, all of us human beings. And I think that this question of difference and diversity is probably the biggest challenge which still faces humanity everywhere in the world. And it's very difficult not to slip into the, oh, but they're different, othering category, which is the problem with the book called Coaching in Islam, in my opinion. Not that we don't want to find out about different people's cultures. I think we do, because it's endlessly fascinating. It's enriching. But it is tempting to look at what's different. So I think having an open and frank discussion with any mentors that you are supporting in your network about that issue, put it on the table, get it out, talk it through. I just share a story with you, but this is very personal, actually. I am somebody with a hidden disability. Nobody has any idea what my disability is, or apart from one person on this webinar, but because I told him. But nobody knows what that is. And I once had a bit of a problem with being challenged by somebody because I was using a disabled facility. And it struck me that maybe I should put up a whole load of photographs of people with obvious disabilities and people with disabilities that aren't obvious, and saying which person has a disability. Mind you, I don't even like the word disability. It is a difference that I have to other people. I function in a different sort of way. But nevertheless, it's a challenge for the person that may feel like that, but it's also a challenge the way people interact with each other about it. And I think that working with your mentors, discussing these things becomes an important part of the mentoring process, so that people's differences become a source of interest, become a source of stimulation, an opportunity to learn from each other about how other people do their lives. Any more thoughts on that? Okay, let's move on. Another question that we need to think about: if mentoring is all those things that we talked about, what about language? What about language? What difference might that make? Now, I know this has been discussed on previous webinars as well, but I just wondered if we could add a little bit more. What about language? Any thoughts? Okay. Jörg?
Well, obviously, language can be an issue, but
Yes.
It's something we are all used to. Like when you talk to a small child,
Yep.
So we have the ability to communicate with other people who don't have a certain command of language,
Yep.
who are missing out on certain words.
Yep.
And it's just, in my opinion, it's really just something you need to be aware of as a mentor.
Yes.
And you will find a way. If you really want to, you will find a way to communicate. You
Yep.
can use a piece of paper and pen and draw something to explain something. So
Yep.
there's so many ways to express what you think and what you feel. And you don't necessarily need the words.
Sure.
And especially if you have a one-on-one conversation, like in real life, rather than like a video call, it's even easier.
Yeah. I remember a long time ago being in Paris, and I speak a little bit of French, just a little bit, and I was asking for something and trying to have a brief conversation with this guy buying some tickets, and he said to me, "It's okay, I speak English." And I thought, yeah, well, there I am butchering his language, but there we are. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to share a story with you. This is a true story. It was a story told to me by a very well-known coach. Her name is Nancy Klein, and she published a very interesting book called Time to Think. And she's very keen on this idea of mentors or coaches providing space for people to think. Now, she tells this story, she told me this story where she was working with this guy who said to her, "Oh, this is so difficult for me because English isn't my first language." So she said, "Well, you tell me what you want to tell me in your own language. That's fine." And he said, "Oh, thank you. Do you speak Italian?" And she said, "Well, no, I don't actually, but you tell me anyway, because that's the best way for you to communicate." And she said he spoke for 20 minutes in Italian. She still doesn't know what he said. But when he finished, he said, "Thank you so much for listening to me. It's helped me sort out my thoughts." Thoughts on that? The power of listening, absolutely, absolutely. And what is important about the power of listening is that actually, if we listen, the person will extract their own meaning from it. The mentor doesn't have to give it to them. So, yeah, language can be an issue. And if there's training, language can be an issue. Although I've had some really good experiences with Boris, with having a simultaneous translator speaking. Me wearing an earpiece has worked very, very well. Seems to work very well. I haven't been attacked anyway. So there are ways around it, but also there is something about acknowledging that that person is a person, will have their own language and have their own way of expressing it, and that requires some respect sometimes. Yeah, you can talk yourself into your own solution. Yeah, you just need space. Absolutely right. Okay, so let's keep going, just thinking of the time. So if this is what mentoring is, what we've just talked about, all these things within this context that we've talked about as well, there are some challenges and differences. A key question is, who should be the mentors? Who should be the mentors in these situations? Well, again, drawing on some research here, this is who the mentors should be. People who are ready to mentor, and this comes from some research. A good potential mentor may talk in terms of giving something back, making a difference, changing things. Now, these are questions which are based on a very important, these are issues which are based on a very important concept called generativity. Generativity is a fundamental concept that every single human being possesses. It's about the desire to bring on the next generation. It's about the desire to support others, to help others to learn. And all human beings have it, because if we don't have it, we don't learn, we don't progress. So generativity is very important. Now, these are some of these statements here are some of the things which give clues to the fact that people have this generativity concept. But it's also important to realize that mentors will sometimes be asking themselves questions. Do I have the experience and the qualities required? What am I supposed to do? What is involved? And if they're asking these questions of themselves, they are likely to be ready to be mentored. That's important. And if you want a little bit more on that, the next slide here, a good mentor needs varied experience, the experience of being helped and supported by other people so that they know what it's like. But also they need to know the opposite of that, of what it's like to be left on your own and unsupported. That's important. And it's also a recognition that they can see mentoring qualities in other people. That's important as well. So a good mentor should be someone who is socially aware, that's aware that cultures operate in different ways. There's a big culture, there's a small culture, there's an individual culture. But they do have the skills that are necessary of listening, questioning, and holding a conversation with a purpose. And they're committed and they're interested. These are key things that you should be asking your mentors, that they're asking questions about, you're going to put me into this particular context. What does it mean? If they're not asking those questions, maybe they're not such a good mentor. A good mentor is a mentor that asks questions about who they are and what they do and who they're going to be working with. And particularly important in this particular environment, because it will give you an indicator as to who potentially is going to make a good mentor in this particular context. So what development and support do they need? Well, mindful of time, they need ongoing support through regular sessions. So if you've got a group of mentors who are working in this context, be aware that they will need to find opportunities to talk about it. So lots of ways in which you can do that, by having events, by having webinars, by using video material, by having WhatsApp groups, by having phone-ins, all sorts of things which are going to be offering these mentors opportunities to talk about their experiences and find ways through them. Similarly, it's important to think about how the mentees are supported, but this webinar is primarily about the mentors. And also, it's important that the mentor recognizes and understands that the relationship will go through the phases that I talked about earlier. And the key to those phases is, first of all, understanding them. And secondly, being aware that if the relationship is flatlining or it's faltering about to fail, then there are things that can be done. And one of the things a mentor can do is go back to the ground rules, have a discussion, open it up for further debate. Any comments or questions on that? Anybody wants to put their hand up? Okay, we'll move on. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is evaluation. And evaluation is very important because, mainly because there will be people funding these projects that you're working on, and they want to know, how's it doing? Yeah, somebody's just added here, I find this is one of the things that programs don't work and fail, is they don't offer the mentors ongoing support. Yeah, absolutely. So how do we go about evaluating it? Well, there are lots of ways. My preferred method is a method called, and some of you may have heard me talk about this before, it's called Realist Evaluation. Realist Evaluation. Now, it's not about evaluating objectives. It's not about that. It's not about saying, what are the objectives of mentoring? Were they achieved? It's actually something else. It's saying, why did you create this program in the first place? What is the theory behind the program? And you have to be able to articulate that. So if you have created a program of mentoring to support people from Syria, for example, why? What's the theory? What do you think it will do? And it will do more than achieve certain objectives. It will do more than that. So that's the first stage, articulate your theory. The next stage is consider 3 interacting variables, 3 things which surround the program that you're looking at. What is the context? What are the mechanisms that you have put in place? So training, support, workshops, webinars, phone-ins, films, videos, etc., meetings, events, those sorts of things. What are the mechanisms you've put in place? What are the expected outcomes? What do you expect to happen? But bear in mind, sometimes those change. Having spent years evaluating mentoring programs, you always have to be ready for surprises, because it doesn't always end up as you expect, but it often ends up better. And then you create what's called a logic chain. And the logic chain is, what is it about X, the context, that creates a process, the mechanism that you've created, which leads to Y, the outcome? You see, it's a logic. What is it about X, the context, that creates a process, a mechanism, which leads to Y, the outcome? And then step 3, you have to think about how you collect the data to address the logic chain, which should be related to the theory you've created at the beginning. And the ways to collect data, there's not many of them. Talking to people, interviews, feedback mechanisms, questionnaires, focus groups. There are only limited number of ways in which you can collect the data. Talking to people in various forms, sending them questionnaires in various forms. Thinking about who your stakeholders are is important as well. And then, of course, when you've gathered all that together, you need to put it together in themes which address the issues in the logic chain, which address the theory that you've created, and you write it up and put your report in. And you're much more likely to have an evaluation which is more complete and more subtle than just evaluating outcomes. Any thoughts on that? Thank you. Any thoughts on that one? Give it a try. Give it a try. Okay. Finally, we've spent an hour thinking about mentoring in a particular context of people that have their own unique qualities and abilities and challenges. So what has this webinar meant for you? And what are you going to do about it? So you can use the chat box, or you can raise your hand and say something. So what has it meant to you? And what are you going to do about it?
So for me, it's that mentoring is enough powerful and open that is not about focusing on one target with special needs. It's focusing on the individual.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, Gim. Thank you. How might that make a difference? Understanding that, how might that make a difference? That's a tough question, I know. Okay, we've got a question. Good to be reminded that you don't have to do anything magic. It's just be more human. Yeah, yeah. Let's have a bit more of that. Let's have a bit more of that. Any other thoughts? Use the chat box or unmute yourself or put your hand up and ask to unmute. Anything else?
Hi, Bob. It's Andy again, Woodland Assist.
Hi.
This is the first time I've been given the link from Lancashire County Council, the project manager there. So this is my first interaction with this type of webinar, which I found very useful.
Okay, good. Thank you. In which ways have you found it useful?
Most of the things you say are complete common sense. Just gathering them all together in bullets and going through the process.
Yes.
Yeah, it just gives some clarity, I think.
Yeah, great. Okay. The problem, Andy, is common sense isn't necessarily common. But
absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree with that.
But yeah, okay. Thanks for that comment. Yeah. Any other thoughts from anybody? Do look at the other webinars, Andy. Actually, do look at the other ones.
Yeah, I will. As I say, it's the first time I've been aware of the webinars happening. So thank you for that.
Okay, great. Good.
It's Boris. I think that if we remember that mentoring, it's relations between two people.
Yes.
It helps us to understand that, yes, people can be different. It can be migrants or in other categories. But the main point, which is important, that this is relations.
Yes.
And there is a common thing, there is a specific. And if we train mentors, they need to understand common things and they need to take into account specific. But common things between people are more important than the specific things which we need to take into account, but
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very important point. You know, what human being doesn't care for their family and want to do the best for them? You know, everywhere on the planet. Any other points before we close? Thank you, Bob. Okay, thank you. Put a mentor on your life. Absolutely right. You can see that that's on the bottom of my slide there. Put a mentor on your life. I think it's probably time to close. Thank you very much for joining in and for participating. And do have a look at this again and think about it. Think about your so whats and your what next. So thank you for your time and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for sharing your knowledge and for doing by your special way. Thank you also to YBI for the support on delivering these webinars. You can find the webinars in the MN app website. And thank you all for your participation. I only want to remember that YBI will hold a masterclass the first week of June in Barcelona, and we will go deeply in training, in mentoring, especially for young entrepreneurs, but also targeting other vulnerable groups. And just remember that you can find all the information about the MAP network in our website. Thank you very much for all, and see you next time. See you in Barcelona in June.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye.
Bye.